We're fine.
Okay then, so let's go. Let's go, shall we, Hazel?
Amen.
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you this morning, Hazel, to talk about your absolutely gripping book, which I found difficult to put down at times, Orestes and the Lifting of the Family Curse. Now, we have known each other for many years, haven't we? And it will be the same for many people who are tuning in. But for those who don't know you, I thought I'd give a little bit of an introduction in addition to what Ian has provided, which I've taken from the back of one of your books. I hope you don't mind if I just begin by reading it. Hazel, M.Ed, is a psychotherapist and has since 1989 been running transpersonal courses based on the work of Ian Gordon Brown and Barbara Summers. Her profound knowledge of and admiration for their work has enabled her to edit it into 4 volumes, which have become known as the Wisdom of the Transpersonal series. They have now become classics and form the basis of transpersonal courses and training both here and also abroad. Hazel has since authored 3 books and is currently working on a 4th. I hope that's correct, Hazel. Yes. So all Hazel's books have been published by Ian Thorpe at Archive Publishing. So to begin, I'd like to briefly pass the floor over to Ian, Hazel's long-term friend and also publisher. And I've asked him to tell us a little bit about Hazel and her work, how they started out, the beginnings of Archive Publishing and the books that they've worked on together. So Ian kindly pre-recorded his part on Tuesday before Hazel and I began our interview. So I'll switch over to the recording now and circle back at the end for our interview and Q&A.
Okay, it's one of those sort of tales that when I look back now and try and recall it, it just seems a fantasy. My wife and I at the time had just decided, well, we've been living in the west of Ireland for 10 years and living really an idyllic life from my perspective, growing all of our own food as much as possible and that sort of thing, and had a nice little flock of organic sheep and heaven knows what. But I could understand that she felt bereft of her grandchildren. In the years we'd been away from England, her 3 daughters had all produced children and we just weren't seeing anything of them. So the decision was made to move back to England, which I was not at all happy about, I have to say, because I felt that my bones would be buried in Ireland. I just loved living there, loved the people and so on. But anyway, we decided we would come back, and as it happened, we landed just the last few days of November, right at the millennium, 1999. And I just didn't know what was going to happen, had no idea what my life would be. But there was in my soul, it's that different level, was a feeling that something exciting was going to happen, but I had no idea what. So we packed all of our belongings, came back to England, and I wanted to get involved with a spiritual group as quickly as possible. We had quite for the remote west of Ireland, we had a very active little spiritual group of people that met, and I wanted to try and, get back into something like that. And I happened to, I can't remember whether it was in the dentist or something, signing into a new dentist, as you do when you have to move. And Kindred Spirit magazine fell off the shelf, which I picked up. And there was an article which grabbed my attention by Professor David Fontana, who was then head of the British Psychological Society, sorry, not of the whole society, of the transpersonal section. And I'd heard the word transpersonal before, but knew nothing else about it. So there was a number there. I rang, got hold of a really lovely person whose name I've forgotten at the moment, but she was the secretary of the transpersonal setup that was still the remnants, if you like, of what Ian and Barbara had set up in London years before. And she said, "Oh, where are you living?" I said, "Oh, we're up in Lincolnshire." And she said, "Oh, you don't want to be coming down to London. You must go and meet Hazel Marshall." So she gave me her number and I phoned her up, and this lovely, welcoming soul said, "Oh, yes, well, we've got some meetings on," and so on and so forth. And we suddenly whistled into going to weekend meetings and started the workshops, doing workshop 1 and so on. And I can't remember now exactly, it doesn't matter, but I was at a workshop, and we were sort of having our usual breakdown in the kitchen, which some of you will be familiar with, and splitting into groups and chattering. And I was chattering with a few people, 3 or 4 of us. And at some level behind me, I heard Hazel say, and I presented this book to a number of publishers, the manuscript, and none of them are interested. And apparently I turned around just briefly and said, "Oh, I know all about that. Don't worry, I'll help you." I turned back and carried on my conversation. It wasn't until I think 2 or 3 days later, the phone rang, picked it up, and it was Hazel on the phone. She said, "That was wonderful. Now, what were you saying the other day when?" And so we got talking, and I said, "Well, I used to publish books when I had design, print, and business and all the rest of it. So I know how to put books together, how to publish them, and so on." "Oh, well, we better get started then." And I remember going on a trip with her down to Clarke Publishing, who were, I'm not sure whether they're still going or whether they've amalgamated, but the offer was basically that I would put it all together, all the time and effort, all the time and effort that Hazel had already put into this book, and they would then publish it with some ridiculously low percentage royalty for all the efforts. And basically I would get nothing for my part. Not that I was that bothered about that per se, but I just felt it was a typically bad deal and said so. And I think 1 or 2 expletives were expressed by both of us as we got back into the car to make the journey back from Finchley Road back up to Hazel's. But and then a few days later we got chatting again, and the name, or we've both been thinking of titles or names for it, but Hazel came up with Archive Publishing, which just seemed brilliant, because she then told me the story about the 96 tapes that Barbara had passed on to her, or tapes of all of the workshops that they'd ever done, from which then Hazel started to, or had started to work on, well, the first book, which some of you I'm sure have seen, Journey in Depth, my old copy stuck together with sellotape and everything. But so that was the one that was ready for printing. And basically that's how it all got started. So yeah, it was just one of those things that you never imagine will happen, and yet they happen. And it certainly happened to me, or to both of us, as it were. And really gave me a hang, a peg to hang my hat on, because when I read more into the transpersonal, and particularly when I read the manuscript for the first time, it was just, my heart was singing, and oh wow, I think I can actually get over the fact I've come back from Ireland. It was going to be have to be
Yes.
something big, to help me get over that emotional change, because I just, obviously loved it there. So unfortunately or fortunately, whichever way one looks upon it, my marriage didn't last for so long once we had come back. But I was very much by that time ensconced, truly in the transpersonal, and was formal training as a counsellor and so on, a psychotherapist. And it proceeded from there. And then after we launched Journey in Depth in 2002, it sold very well. All the hardbacks sold almost before we'd actually released the book. They were all signed copies, which was wonderful. And we sold out the paperbacks probably 10 years, probably 6-7 years ago, and have had to repeat print Journey in Depth a couple of times since then.
Marvellous.
Yeah.
Marvellous.
But obviously then I learned that it seemed to be, as soon as we'd got one book sorted, Hazel had already been working, doing her early morning shifts as she does on the computer, going through all these tapes. And she had, although Barbara and Ian had always advised that people should not go into the other part of their brain to make notes, but just to be open to what they were saying. Hazel, thankfully, has got the mind of an editor, and obviously with her education and training as a teacher for years, she wanted to make notes, because that's her way of learning and her way of remembering. So thankfully, all of her notes, combined with going through the tapes as reminders and talking to other people who've been on the courses, she then put together the Fires of Alchemy, which was very much Barbara's side, if you like, of their partnership working together, which Hazel never thought would sell to quite the same degree, but I always felt that would be one that would, also catch people's imagination. And so in 2004, that one was published, and then followed by the Rain Cloud of Knowable Dreams, which was more, well, it was combined, but if you like, more Ian's work, I suppose, to a degree, although they both did all of the workshops together. And then finally we did the one which I was very sort of excited about, because when you're doing any psychological training, it's very difficult to get hold of books that really talk in layman's terms about mental experiences, because they're all coming from that angle of it's an illness, rather than seeing it as they always talked about psyche as soma, and seeing it as another experience to shift us along our road of self-discovery.
Yeah.
And I'll have to just grab a copy. The symptom as symbol, which was slightly different because I suppose this was published in, can't remember off the top of my head, 2010. So there'd been, quite a gap before this one.
Yeah.
And I felt that I wanted to introduce a bit more colour into the book. Obviously, there'd always been colour. I always did the diagrams, illustrations, tried to follow whatever Ian and Barbara, because their diagrams obviously were drawn on whiteboards or on flip charts,
Yes.
things like that. They weren't didn't do. I have now transferred them all onto computer. So if I run the courses, workshops 1, 2, and 3, then I can just sit there with the computer. But obviously, for years, I did use flip charts as well. But tried to keep the sort of authenticity and simplicity of their original diagrams. And I remember getting a lovely card from Barbara, sadly, both obviously Ian and Barbara. I never knew Ian because he had died before I came back from Ireland. But this lovely letter I got from Barbara thanking me for all the work and for the, she mentioned the diagrams in particular, which was great. So we did sort of become a little bit more colourful on that one.
Yeah.
And dispersed it with lovely paintings by Pamela Alsop, who was very much, had done all of the training with them and produced some absolutely lovely paintings that run through the pages as well as the diagrams. So it costs more to produce, but these absolutely lovely,
Beautiful,
wonderful paintings. Because I just felt, being an artist myself as well, I just felt that colour images are so important to us now, have been for years, obviously since colour television. Obviously before that, lots of ordinary people didn't have access to colour images, but now, we're so familiar and they can be so evoking.
yes.
Along with the text, very, very important. So symptom as symbol is a little bit different, but I love it because we've got that extra. We were bold enough to put that extra element into it.
Yes.
And that's paved the way for other books that I was publishing at the time.
Yeah.
So,
What a wonderful relationship you've had, as you describe it in depth here. What a wonderful working relationship you've had.
Yes, oh, absolutely. And just Hazel, people that know her, there's absolutely no nonsense. It's just, there's no hidden agendas or anything. You can talk openly and easily. It makes making decisions and so on so much easier.
Yes.
But it's also with such warmth and tenderness, and so it just makes for a really lovely working and life relationship, which is wonderful. Yeah.
How lovely. And I mean, she's had a bit of a renaissance, hasn't she, over these, latterly, with the new books that she's published, again, all in a row.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful that obviously there was this great drive in her to, because going back to the name of archive, that was how Barbara described, you are the archivist, as she handed over the tapes to her, apparently. And so, it was an obvious title.
Yes.
But and it was her main concentration was to do that, and I can understand that, and it was such a pleasure. I know it's an overused word these days in a way, but a pleasure, but an honor to be part of it.
Yeah.
And it was, I just felt it was like I was getting a personal intuition for, personal tuition from some hidden source
Yes.
that obviously, was very much the whole energy of the transpersonal.
Yes.
People that have done the workshops, I'm sure, will be able to chime with that, because that is what it's like. It's just such a wholesome, holistic way of getting on our journey.
Yes.
It's terrific.
Yes.
So yeah, I've so enjoyed working with her, and so when she came up with wanting to write a book on Dante, or that, and that usually meant she'd more or less got it finished. I've been thinking about this book on Dante. What do you think? And next thing, there's a manuscript there. So yeah, wonderful, because and the same with Orestes, they're not necessarily books or subjects that one would so much automatically go to, and particularly if you haven't had a more classical education, where because and it's such a shame in a way, because there's such a plethora of absolutely brilliant, wonderful stories and so on that come out of Greece and so on, and certainly that and the stories, the one I love, my favorite is The Golden Asp. I can never say it, Asclepius, I think it
Yes.
is. And I just love it. It is they were true shanners, as we call them in
Yes.
Ireland, storytellers,
Yeah.
and people who could easily just pull up a stool and sit down in front of a crowd of people and start talking.
Yeah.
And I did experience that actually in a trip to France once, years ago. And I just happened to go into this small village, and there was a festival on, and didn't have hardly any French to really know what was being said, but you don't have to, because it's the atmosphere that it creates.
Yes.
I think that's
Yes.
the wonderful thing
Yeah.
with Hazel's way of writing, that with both of those books, it is like somebody talking to you, telling you a story.
Yes.
She makes them so accessible.
Yes.
Because most people who pick up Dante, the Inferno, or whatever, you struggle into it, and then you think, well, no, actually, this isn't for me.
Yes.
But you pick up that and start reading, and you're hooked.
Yes. Yeah.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
So it's been an absolute joy. No, she's an absolute wordsmith, and ability to write in a way that makes things accessible is wonderful. And I suppose you could say, and she'd probably acknowledge it, that she cut her teeth on the transpersonal books.
Yes. Yeah.
Is where she learned the craft.
Yeah.
Honing to get those accurate and right, Yeah. So it's, I suppose what I could say is that, and must say, is that all of her books still, and Journey in Depth the first one from 2002, they all still sell. They've all become classics. I'm only a small, what would be called a small independent publisher. I don't employ anybody, couldn't afford to, wouldn't make any money out of it to pay them. But it's been such a wonderful, if you like, well, I say second half of my life, or last third of my life. I don't know quite how to describe it. I never imagined that I would have such a wonderfully satisfying business, but I don't see it as a business either, because it's just so satisfying.
Oh, Ian, that's what a wonderful story you've shared with us today. I'm so appreciative, and I'm sure that others will be too. And I'm sure Hazel will be blown away when she listens to everything that you've said. But I see that she's in the waiting room now, so we perhaps should bring this to an end. But before I let her in, Ian, would you like to say a few concluding words?
I don't, I can't think whether there's anything that I could add to what I've already said. Just that I'm working on other books that are very, very important books at the moment. And I think it's what I would like to say is to all concerned, on whatever dimension they are, or wherever they are, that just a wonderful, heartfelt thank you, because working with Hazel has given me huge confidence to see myself as able and capable of working with anybody, and as you know, that has included for the last 10-12 years and bearing,
yes,
and so on. So
yes.
I would never have had the confidence to be able to work with people, or be able to, if you like, feel that confident enough about being able to sell enough copies of their books, or to get it out there. I know I can't do that.
Yeah.
That's very much again into the lap of the gods. But Hazel, it all started with that conversation way back in the kitchen at Rock Bank.
Oh.
Me earwigging in. and that, that's it. But
and
yes.
Here we are. Thank you so much, Ian. I'm so appreciative of you coming along and sharing your story with us today. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So Hazel, I want to launch straight in with an observation about your palpable love for your characters, the characters that you write about. Poor Dante, I've heard you say oftentimes of the Italian mystic, having to come back to his Monday morning reality after his ineffable moment of bliss up in the Paradiso. And poor Orestes too, caught in this seemingly endless family cycle of violence and retribution, as you point out, through absolutely no fault of his own. And it's this palpable love, together obviously with your other skills and talents, that really does enable the reader to really engage and relate to the characters whom you make very, very accessible. And this, of course, in a way, this was the point of ancient Greek theatre, this fostering of what I've written in my notes, an empathic pondering by the audience, and watching the characters as they go through their terrible, terrible problems, and staying with them and gradually coming to your own understanding of how they learn to move forward eventually. So I want to move on to asking you what prompted you to tell the story of Orestes, what attracted you to him. But first of all, I just wanted to say a little bit about how much lockdown, in a way, terrible as it was, closed, obviously for very clear reasons. For Rock Bank, you had to close the doors to the courses that you were running. But it also seemed as if it was in some way also a blessing, because it seemed as if it left you free to pursue your writing. And one of the things that has come from it is the book, which is our subject today, about Orestes. And I remember from attending Rock Bank that it was always a favourite of yours. He was always a favourite. And you'd run many workshops on Orestes. And in fact, one was scheduled to take place, if I'm not incorrect, in the late spring of 2020, which had to be cancelled. But now it's a book, which is marvellous. So Hazel, tell us, what is it about Orestes, and what is it that prompted you to tell this story as you have told?
Well, Orestes came to my mind through a set of tarot cards, and the pictures of the tarot cards are in the book. And those tarot cards were illustrating the suit of swords, which, as those of you who are familiar with the tarot will know, is generally all about trouble and difficulty and strife. And Orestes, this poor kid, born into a really dysfunctional family, as no doubt you're aware, was born into a real double bind. First thing that happens to him, he's exiled as a tiny kid, sent away into the country to stay with relatives, and hardly sees his own mother or father, certainly not his father, or his sister, for years. And there he is growing up somewhere else, kind of half knowing about his family and half not. And so that appealed to me very much, this child sitting on the sand, thinking, what on earth am I doing here in this world? And I felt for him that kind of boarding school feeling that anyone who's being just sent away from home will be familiar with.
Oh, yes.
So that,
yes.
Where him.
Yes. And one of the things I loved straight away about the book was actually the title, Orestes and the Lifting of the Family Curse. And how, what a marvellous distillation that is of the entire story. Because it's the, you know, the problem, the journey, the long struggle, and implicit in the title is this promise of a happy ending. So we're reassured, aren't we, from the get-go that all will be well in the end, and we know where we're going. And it reminded me of a phrase that I've heard you use so often, which is asking the question, where are we going? And the answer being always home. And you tell us at the start, Hazel, I'm quoting from you now, by the end, if you stick with the story, by the end, dawn will not be too far away. And yet, having said that very reassuringly, you begin with a caution, although the end is implicit, and because the story is arduous. And you say at the beginning, only attend to it if you're feeling strong. So I wondered if you could tell us more about why you included that caution, Hazel.
Well, in those days, trouble meant very often killing and death and disappearing and all things like that. Nowadays, it more likely means quarrels that can go on through families, through generations. And Orestes got born into one of those families, and for us, it might well remind us of double binds we've been in, of situations we've had where you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And it's that sort of story. And Orestes is in it for a long time in the story. It's all these old Greek playwrights wrote this story, and they all went back to the same story, all three of them, back to that story of Orestes, as though they had something really important to say to the world about how can this curse, this double bind, be lifted. And that's the question. How do we do it? How is it done?
Yes. And of course, when you're introducing the reader to the plot lines, you're very clear that a lot of it is actually the audiences of the day would have been quite familiar with the mythic background that was underneath the plays, the work of Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey and the stories that were rooted there. And that background would have been very well known. And the subsequent play written by Aeschylus it is also at the root of your story, isn't it? The trilogy, the three movements, the Agamemnon, the libation bearers and the Eumenides. And then what I found wonderful about the book is that you've also interwoven these stories by Euripides, the plays by Euripides. And so you've got this very lovely and unique weave of all these threads, which creates such a gripping tale. Back in ancient Greece, these performances of these plays would have perhaps taken several days in the telling. And as you explain, they were deep, teaching stories to be reflected upon by the audiences. And your readers will discover, Hazel, as they go through your story, that you've also included questions at the end of your chapters for us to ponder upon as we proceed through the tale. And I noticed that it's not the first time that you've done this. And I wonder if you can tell us why you've chosen to do this for several of your books.
Well, I think it's to do with the transpersonal way of working that I learned from Ian Gordon Brown and Barbara Summers, where they would tell you a very brief story, paint a very small picture, and leave you and your imagination to expand it as you will, different from everyone else in the room, and then give you lots and lots of time to explore that imagining and record it and share it with other people. And to my mind, that was the most important bit. The story, in a way, was secondary to the question to you at the end of each chapter. How's this for you? Where would you have gone? What would you have done in this awful or wonderful situation? Yeah. How would it be for you? Yes.
Yes. Yes. Yes. It is marvelous. I mean, I've pondered the questions myself as I've gone through, and it is marvelous. So. Can we go to still at the beginning now of the book? Can we talk a little bit about Orestes in exile, where, as you say, he's been taken from an early age in order to protect him, and he has, as you've said, Hazel, he has got no idea of the story that's behind him, and that story is the story of Agamemnon, his father, sacrificing his sister and Agamemnon's daughter at the behest of the gods in order to summon the winds, the much needed winds, to take the Greek army off to the Trojan War. And the sacrifice being a terrible act for which he's never ever forgiven by his wife, Clytemnestra, who in her agony is consumed with rage and desire for retribution. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit of the story there, how that transpires.
Well, it's a really dysfunctional family. It's a broken family. Dad does this thing that Caroline just said of killing the sister, the older sister, in order to have to keep his head on his own neck, actually, in order to get the winds to blow the way he wants, so that his own soldiers and sailors won't turn on him, but can go off and fight the Trojan War, which they're all bursting to do. So off they all go and fight, and the sister is left. And the mother, Clytemnestra, the wife, is in a desperate situation. Her daughter has been taken from her by her awful husband, from her point of view. Their relationship has now fallen completely apart, but she's got this baby. And he's only a few months old, if barely that. And he is the son and heir. And of course, he's too small to know anything about it. And he grows up kept entirely in the dark. Talk about family secrets. Your father kills your sister and nobody tells you ever. And you grow up under that shadow. And for a lot of people, that kind of secret has a really, really potent effect in their lives. And they've no idea why. It's a secret. They don't know it. So I'm asking at the end of the chapter, have you got secrets like this that maybe do need exploring?
Yes, 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 yeah. So Hazel, as you say, Orestes been sent away, living in a kind of exile, not knowing anything of this story. But then there comes a time when his guardians decide to tell him exactly what has gone on. And I wonder if you can tell us, Hazel, what Orestes learns at that point and what then transpires.
The difficulty is that his guardian, who's quite a decent chap, the king of a city-state up the coast, he knows that he ought to be telling Orestes about his own family history, because Orestes is now 11, 12, getting on, and he needs to know. And then messages come from the place where Orestes does live, Argos. Messages come saying the queen has just received the king home and she's killed him. She kills him in his bath. Her rage over the 10, 11 years that have elapsed has overcome her altogether. She's been living with a boyfriend all along, and it's time that Orestes knew what had happened. So the poor old king where he's staying is very embarrassed, but has to tell him. And luckily there's a good tutor around the place who supports both the king, whose minion he is, and Orestes, and looks after Orestes a bit and takes him to the Delphic oracle. And I don't know whether you know what the Delphic oracle is, I didn't, but at any rate, an oracle is a kind of soothsayer who belonged in those days particularly to one of the gods. And this god is Apollo, the sun god, the masculine principal god. And Apollo's oracle lives at the nearby town of Delphi in the mountains. And the tutor, I've given him a fictitious name, Demetrius, but he takes Orestes to the Delphic oracle to hear what the Delphic oracle has to say about his life. So that's first encounter of Orestes with the gods.
Yes. And can you tell us what the gods say to him, Hazel?
Well, they don't come by with, what about a bit of wisdom here or anything like that. Instead, they say, you're growing up, Orestes, get yourself sorted out, learn a few martial arts, make sure you know how to kill people, and then go and exact revenge.
Yes. Yeah.
Retribution's the name of the game, revenge. Your mother killed your father. Your father was a man and a great man. He'd done good stuff, if you like that sort of thing, by going and winning the Trojan War. And therefore, to have killed him is a dreadful crime, and you must kill your mother.
Yes. And reading your chapters relating to this, it seems as if everybody around Orestes is really colluding in this idea. He's not getting any other advice.
Absolutely.
Yes. Yeah.
Nobody sticks up for Clytemnestra.
Would you like to say more about that, Hazel?
something that I've felt very strongly about in reading these plays. The playwrights don't notice her, really. They more or less write her off as a wicked woman. The artists paint pictures of her looking very nasty. But nobody realizes just how awful the initial killing of her daughter was for her.
Yes.
She was shamed, she was insulted, she was ignored, she was treated like a minion. She's the queen, after all, of that city-state.
Yes.
And no wonder she's hurt and nobody defends her.
Yes, yes. Moving to part 3 of your book, I can't believe we're there already, but it's in the original play by Aeschylus, originally titled the Eumenides. It begins, doesn't it, in the immediate aftermath of Clytemnestra's murder.
Mm-hmm.
But do you want to say something about something before that, Hazel? Because we seem to have rushed on slightly.
Yeah, Orestes grows up at this point. He grows from 12 to 17, 18. He gets his friends, and Demetrius, the tutor, helps as well. He's got a good friend who's the local, his guardian king's son, and Pallades. And the three of them, these three men, go off back to Orestes' hometown to kill the queen. And they plan it very neatly, and they execute it very neatly, and they take her boyfriend out at the same time. So, yeah, that's what Orestes then does, if you like.
Yes. And he's reunited with his sister Electra at that point as well, isn't he?
He had another sister.
Yes, another sister who's, in a way, is quite keen to get rid of the mum as well, too, isn't she? Yeah.
Electra is a feisty, masculine type girl who hates her mother and doesn't let anybody not know it, too, and absolutely castigates her mother, who doesn't kill her for it, but sort of endures her at a distance. And it's Electra who's put Orestes up to coming and killing his mother because she's so pro-father, dead father, and so anti her own mother.
Yes. And they meet at the tomb, don't they, at Agamemnon's tomb, which is a wonderfully evocative part of your book, which I really enjoyed reading. And it's quite interesting because Orestes leaves a lock of his hair there next to a lock of her hair. And then he hides, and then she appears, and because they both got curly hair, she kind of she becomes alerted to the fact that maybe, and it turns out that it is him, and it's a wonderfully sweet reunion. I found the way you wrote it, even though they're just about to then be involved in the most dastardly deed. It's still there was you conveyed a sweetness between Electra and the brother that she'd been estranged from for such a long time in that scene.
Yes. Electra's very masculine principle, as I said before, and I think it shows Orestes' own feminine side a little bit, that he's so keen to meet her again.
Yes.
And it's a very long, in the plays, a very long drawn out reunion thing where they don't really recognize each other, but they sort of do, and it goes on, and it's lovely.
Yes. And of course, the old nurse is there, isn't she, at that time?
And she got left out of the index by my fault by some reason. I'm so sorry about that, because she's a wonderful character in the tale.
Yes, she is. She's a very balancing character, isn't she?
Yeah. She would be on Clytemnestra's side, except she keeps the secret.
Yes.
She doesn't tell anybody anything.
Yes. And she does try to temper Electra's rage, doesn't she? And Electra's grief. She does try to temper it.
She's on both sides. She's trying to be wise. She is wise, but can't go far in that atmosphere.
Yeah. But, you know, for all the love between them, there's still the curse that's on the house, as they call it. And so the murder is enacted, and poor Orestes is then he doesn't have the same response as people had hitherto after after committing murders. He's beset with grief and ambivalence, and he suddenly becomes pursued by the Furies, doesn't he, Hazel, at that point?
Yes, because he falls into this awful thing, remorse. And if anybody has suffered from remorse, you'll know it's one of the worst things of all, that desperate feeling of having to change the unchangeable. And he realizes that killing his mum, which everybody's egged him on to do, and he's done it very neatly too, that actually it was a terrible crime and he shouldn't have done it. And Apollo was wrong. And it's an awful time where he just turns against himself. And I don't know, I think a lot of depression can have elements of remorse and guilt in them. And again, the lifting of the family curse. How do you get out of that remorse? And he falls right into it, plonk.
Yes. The silver lining of the curse seems to be that seems to be a moment where there begins to be a shift. It's that remorse and that ambivalence, which is the way it's written in the original plays, absent from the previous murders, actually does begin to turn the situation round, doesn't it, Hazel? And he goes to find Apollo. Is that correct?
Well, what happens is that he falls ill. He's so desperately, mentally ill, if you like, that he can't run away. He needs to run away because the locals are after him. The locals too begin to question his murder, and he has to get away, but he doesn't. He falls down and becomes completely helpless, and Electra looks after him for a while, and the old nurse. And he really suffers hell. I mean, parallel with Dante here, he falls into hell at this point. This is hell, this remorse. But there is a different ending. As Caroline I'm saying, it turns at this point, begins to turn.
Yes.
And he does begin to get help.
Yes, and how does he do that, Hazel? Do tell us.
What happens in the plays is that Castor and Pollux appear, and they happen to be two uncles, and they were sent into the stars and made gods, as people were in those days, if they deserved it. And Castor and Pollux, I've got them to appear as the local stableman. The local man who's looking after the stables at Argos is a wise man, and I've created him out of Castor and Pollux, so he still comes from Euripides and Aeschylus, but he's I've given him the name Theodore, and Theodore is the wise voice in the plays, and he begins to sort things out, certainly outwardly. And Orestes listens to him, and he's kind, and he gets the old nurse in as well. And the forces of help begin to gather. And what he does is he gives Orestes his own horse. And as Orestes begins to recover, he can ride away into the world of Greece as it is, and survives. And he survives there with his horse for about a year. And the horse I've given him because I like horses, but also he's supposed to have Mercury with him helping. And Mercury doesn't show up otherwise. So I hope Mercury's with the horse, Zephyra.
Yes. How lovely, after all those colluding relatives that haven't served him at all, to suddenly have the appearance of these kindly characters, wise characters, as you say. And a horse, of course. I mean, that does sound very healing.
Yes, she is. She's a wonderful horse.
Yes, yeah. So tell us, Hazel, what then happens? How does he then begin to act, and how does the transformation come to pass?
Well, he no longer sees himself as a prince. He sees himself as a pauper, really. He rides round the country, letting the horse take him where she will. And he survives sort of hand to mouth, but he always looks after the horse. He never lets her go hungry or without water. He takes care when he stops anywhere that she's in a stable looked after by somebody. And that's his care, and she cares for him. And they have a sort of wandering experience for a year until at the end of the year they wander back to Apollo's place where his oracle is at Delphi. And that's the end of that particular bit of the story where he's wandered and come to his senses to a degree, stopped feeling quite so much guilt, realized that however guilty he feels, he's not the only pebble on the beach, and that actually his guilt's no bigger than other people's, really. He's not the devil incarnate after all. Yeah. And so things gather.
So does this mean that the grip of the Furies is beginning to lessen upon him then, Hazel?
The Furies are wonderful in the Greek plays because they are witchy Gorgony types with snaky hair, and they follow him and haunt him like ghosts, and he's scared witless of them, but he kind of survives, and the horse takes no notice of them whatsoever, which is nice in the way that animals do. And eventually the Furies themselves, they're feeble. Here they are, feminine principle again, but they don't stick up for Clytemnestra. That's the thing I picked up in these stories. Nobody points out that they don't stick up for her. They're supposed to. They're in Clytemnestra's pay, as it were. She appears as a ghost, but they don't stick up for her. Not really, not effectively. So she's let down all the way around. That's my feeling anyway.
Yes, yes. And Orestes at the Temple of Apollo undergoes some cleansing rites, doesn't he?
He does, yes. Apollo says, I'll stick up for you, actually, Orestes. What you've got to do now is get yourself to Athens, the city of the Pallas Athene, and you've got to go before Athene in her temple there in Athens, quite a long way from Delphi, and get yourself sorted out that way. And so he wanders off again, and the horse takes him through Arcadia, that lovely name, Arcadia, another district of Greece, and he winds up in Athens.
Yes, and that becomes, in a way, the final part of the trilogy, doesn't it? In a sense,
of Aeschylus' trilogy, but it's not the final part of Euripides.
No, of course not. No. But let's go there for a while, shall we? Because it is hugely significant. Because he arrives, asks for Athena's help, and she comes up with the most, at the time, would have been the most novel idea of creating a court of justice, which was a revolutionary, groundbreaking idea at that historical moment. Because both sides are going to be represented with rational argument, and Orestes is going to be judged by a jury of his peers, with Athena having a casting vote, as it were. And in this way, she overturns the centuries and centuries of the cycle of eye for an eye style, revenge style killings, doesn't she?
Yeah, that retribution. She questions it, and she actually says, Pallas Athene, she is a young goddess, not an old one, like the Furies are old goddesses, but Pallas Athene is a young goddess, as Apollo is a young god. And Pallas Athene says, I need more than just me. I need good men and true to make this judgment. And she then, as Caroline said, gets her jury of 12 men. And if the vote is cast equally for Orestes or against, I will give the casting vote. And you must always give the casting vote for the plaintiff, the one who's suffering the most, the victim of the whole thing. You must give the casting vote that way. And of course, they judge, they hear the cases for Orestes killing his mum, for him not killing his mum, a rather feeble case put up by the Furies. And because it's still nobody's sticking up for her. And the 12 men vote 6 and 6, and Athene gives the casting vote for Orestes, and he's set free. And the first thing he does is he goes and fetches his horse. But meanwhile, Athene is still doing something terribly important.
It's interesting that the vote is split 50-50 and that she has the casting vote. One of the commentaries I was listening to about this trial, they were saying something very interesting about how difficult it was to get the Furies on board. But the fact that it's 50-50, even though there's a casting vote which will mean it will swing one way, it does mean that there's a recognition that both sides have got something to say. It's not, and they referred to this as mature, as opposed to the immature way of looking at such things in a much more polarized sense, like one side being all right and the other side being all wrong. And in fact, Athena's casting vote doesn't actually make the other side all wrong. It just means that this is the way we're going to deal with it now to enable us to go on, to enable us to live. But both sides have been heard. And I thought that was a marvelous thing to say. And of course comes across in your book very, very strongly. The fact that the Furies are heard. They're not just dismissed as nutcases. They're heard. They don't win out in the final instance, but they are heard. And I remember so well, Hazel, going back years and years now, you talking about the Furies at Rock Bank, and you telling us that once they were listened to, they were given, they calmed down, and they became the Eumenides, they became the kindly ones. And the trial and your story, your rendition ends with that wonderful renaming of the Furies after the trial by Athena, doesn't it?
Yes, they become the Eumenides. She honors them. She gives them their own temple. And in the meanwhile, Orestes himself has done the critical thing that saved him and the situation. What he's done is he has fallen in front of the gods, the goddesses, and said, I can't cope anymore. I've carried this curse and I've done my bit and I can do nothing further. Over to you, gods and goddesses, you sort it in your way. And that is the point at which he recovers from his remorse, at which the whole thing turns, and where Athene takes his part in that way. She's very masculine principle too, because as you probably remember, Athene was born from the head of Zeus and had no mother herself. But she tries very hard to be just and fair and honest, and pretty much succeeds, I would think, Athene.
Yes. I've just got a quote that I copied out here from your book, which may I read about this renaming of the Furies, and because obviously they've got to be dealt with, haven't they, Hazel, for peace to prevail. But anyway, you write, as Athena speaks, they were once called the Furies, she begins. Now, in your presence, referring to the people of Athens, I shall rename them the Eumenides, the kindly ones. They will deal with mortals clearly, once and for all. Rejoice, people of Athens, sang the Eumenides, looking kinder as they sang, snakes asleep. You are loved by both Zeus and Athena, the loving goddess. And Athena then led them to their new temple. You citizens treat them with compassion, compassionate as they will be to you, for they are the well-meaning ones. Now, let the torch move on. And apparently they're given red robes as well, you know, to add to the glorious ceremony of everything. And your chapter on this part, Hazel, ends with Orestes making ready to ride away on his beloved horse. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about how he's now feeling.
I mean, that relief of, it's like if you've had I don't know, if you think you're going to get a diagnosis of something dire and then you don't. New life pouring in, that wonderful redemption. Like for Dante, I would imagine, when he and Virgil burst out of hell and found themselves in the dawn, the foot of purgatory. A marvelous moment of freedom from guilt, freedom from remorse. I've paid my debt, I've handed over to the gods, all is now well. Handing it over, letting go of it to something higher.
Yes.
And then he goes straight off to the stable where he'd left his horse and collects her, and they ride back home to Argos.
How lovely. Do you know, you mentioning Dante there just dovetails in really beautifully to my next question, which was stems from another commentary I was listening to in preparation, where the person suggested that, in fact, the Orestes was actually the divine comedy of the ancient world. And I wondered what your take on that was. That progression through the...
Yeah, I just love it. I hadn't thought of it really, but of course it is so. Orestes starts in a pretty gloomy place, lost in the dark wood, and then falls right into hell, just as Dante does. But he's helped. And Orestes, in the end, finds help in Theodore and the old nurse and the horse. And then he's led all the way up the mountain, getting it sorted, fixing it, and finally comes to the freedom from guilt and depression and a kind of happy ever after. But it's not ever after because, as Caroline said on Monday morning, he has to go back to work.
Yeah, a great moment. So we've concluded that part of the tale with the trial and the resolution there. And in your story, your part 4, which then follows, I loved this. I really did love part 4. You pick up on new and often overlooked elements and you weave them into the most satisfying conclusion, which to me felt rather like the icing on the cake, the final ingredient to be really savoured and pondered at the end. And I really can't recommend people to read it enough, and obviously not just part 4, but the whole thing. For it turns out, and although you've hinted at this earlier on in your story, but nobody really took it very seriously, it turns out that in fact, in the version by Euripides, the play by Euripides, Iphigenia, daughter of Agamemnon, thought to be sacrificed to summon the winds, has in fact survived. And I was thinking maybe we should leave these secrets to be uncovered by the reader, but I wondered if you wanted just to say a little bit about it, Hazel.
Yeah, I think so, because Clytemnestra at the very beginning, there are 2 plays done by Euripides. One is called Iphigenia in Aulis, where she's at the seaport, this girl, deceived and cheated by her father, and supported then by her mother, Clytemnestra. And she then is sacrificed to the gods in order to get Agamemnon to his Trojan War. But actually, there's a hint in Euripides that this isn't so, and that in fact, she is spirited away at the last minute by some other men who kidnap her and substitute a deer for her to be killed in her stead. And then Clytemnestra is absolutely furious when she hears this, doesn't believe a word of it, absolute nonsense, just another insult to me. But actually it turns out in the very end, according to Euripides' second play there, to be true. And he wrote Iphigenia in Taurus, and yeah, the sum of the whole thing is they discover each other, and Orestes has a second sister to find.
Yeah. Oh, it's lovely. It really is so satisfying.
Happy ever after.
Yes, yes. How lovely. So Hazel, my final question, in a way, relates to your postscript, in which you ponder you express to us your own final thoughts on the story that's preceded, and you begin. I think you begin by saying, I'll just quote here: "The buck has stopped with Orestes. That was the end of his appalling double bind, damned if you do and damned if you don't. By challenging the gods and also by embracing his fate, he'd brought to an end the curse on the house of Atreus." So Hazel, I wonder if you might then just share in conclusion your final thoughts on the story that you've so beautifully adapted.
Well, it seems the buck has to stop somewhere, and bucks don't, do they? Look at modern politics, look at anything you like in a way. It goes on, tit for tat, retribution after retribution, and people misusing the Bible to say an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And the whole Christian story had not, of course, come in then. This is all several hundred years BC. So that Christian thing, love your enemies, do good to them that hate you, just hadn't been thought of really. But with Orestes, the buck somehow stops. Athene, using her wisdom and her justice, actually makes the thing stop. And Orestes and his family cease to be persecuting each other. And the house of Atreus can be set free from the curse and become a happy house with a king and a queen. I like to think he married and had loads of kids, and everybody settled down nicely.
How lovely. Oh, Hazel, thank you so much, Hazel, for this interview, but for all that you've done and all that you've shared over the years. It's greatly appreciated by so many. Thank you, Hazel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, you and Tony Roberts together, for setting up the Rock Bank Fellowship and making it work in this way. Thank you.
You're so welcome. It's such a privilege, Hazel.